Hello, welcome to Pathways to Peace Symposium. We are working on peace and how we get there. We are exploring different means of pathways to get to peace, interpersonal peace between us, and social peace among us. And maybe someday, maybe we'll see, we will be able to create peace, big peace in the big world. If enough of us know how to create peace inside of us and around us, we're thinking that this will lead toward big peace. We're not sure how else to create that. We're exploring those possibilities, and we also believe that one of the main ingredients that is required for us to feel peaceful and to create peace in our life is being aware of our thoughts and our feelings and our actions, in particular our emotions, emotional intelligence, EQ, EI, SEL, whatever you want to call it. But it is about understanding our emotions. So we are trying to educate the world on how important emotions are and what to do with them, because we don't know. We don't learn it from our parents. We don't learn it in school usually, and we sure as heck better not do them at work, right? Anyway, so that's what we're talking about, and we're jumping up and down about how important it is, because it's pretty incredible how much effect there is. So our next speaker is Josh Freedman from 6 Seconds. Very happy to have him as a speaker here. I don't have a slide or anything, but we're just going to talk. He knows a little bit about emotional intelligence and is happy to share with us. So, Josh.
Well, thank you, Matt, and I'm looking forward to hearing perspectives and sharing a little bit about emotions and how we can use emotions to strengthen connectedness.
Mm.
So, what I would like to start with is I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I'm the Chief Executive Officer and one of the co-founders of a global nonprofit organization called 6 Seconds.
Mm-hmm.
We work in 200 countries and territories. We run the world's largest emotional intelligence program, which is in partnership with UNICEF World Children's Day, bringing the skills of emotional intelligence linked to the Sustainable Development Goals to children and their adults in 200 countries and territories. We started in 1997 as the first global organization committed to increasing emotional intelligence in the world. And we publish numerous assessments in 25 plus languages, curriculum for children and adults. A lot of our work is in the corporate sector. We work with big organizations, small organizations, as well as schools, universities. We have just started in partnership with Antioch University, one of the world's few doctorate programs, educational doctorate programs with a specialization in social emotional learning. I'm very excited about that development. And we have offices and representatives in about 25 countries, certified practitioners in about 150 countries. So that's a little bit of the background. But what I want to share with you is really about emotions and a way of thinking about emotions. A lot of us, when we start learning about emotions and emotional intelligence, frequently what we hear is that emotional intelligence is about, quote, controlling negative emotions. And I have two problems with this notion. The first is I don't think the goal is control. And the second is I don't think there's such a thing as negative emotions.
Mm.
And I am a little bit of a radical in this notion. But what I would like to try to articulate is why this is so important when it relates to peace. And the notion that I would like to share with you, maybe I could encapsulate in a very tiny story, which is right after my stepfather died. I was feeling angry with him. As we all know, anger is a frequent part of the cycle of grief. And I remember saying to myself, oh, you shouldn't be angry. And realizing how deep that should is and how deeply embedded in my own my own way of engaging with emotions is this cultural norm of negative and positive feelings. Now, in that same time period, I remember vividly sitting on the steps outside his house, holding my little brother, who's 10 years younger than me, and we were just sobbing, and it felt wonderful. And so I think about these two moments in reconciling my own relationship with my emotions, and how often in my life this voice of you shouldn't feel that comes up, and how when that voice comes up, I am in some ways going to war with myself, in some ways saying that's not who you should be, that's not allowed, that's not right. That pervasive voice of, oh, you should man up, that pervasive voice grounded in patriarchy, grounded in colonialism, grounded in supremacy, of like, man up means be stronger over others, hide what you're feeling, put up bigger walls, have bigger weapons. And those messages are so deep in Western culture and have become so deep in the world. And our very notion of what powerful is, our very notion of what leader is a voice, is a message about being right over others, about dividing, about beating. And that is a form of power. And let's not kid ourselves. Right now, we can see that being played out in Ukraine, and we can see that the power of force is a real form of power. The power of a gun is a real form of power, but it's not the only form of power. And that is the great myth. The great myth is that, the strong leader is stoic, is John Wayne. And that stoic leader, that archetype, is so deep in our society. It's in our metaphors, it's in our messages, it's in our understanding of gender, it's in our understanding of how we're supposed to show up as people in all kinds of roles. And so often I hear people say to me, well, this is not how I really want to be, but this is how X is supposed to be. This is how a police officer is supposed to be. This is how a manager is supposed to be. This is how a teacher or a dad or a mom is supposed to be. And what I see in all of these stories is a consistent rejection of some part of self, and a rejection of some part of self grounded in the notion that we have some emotions that we should have, and some emotions that are good. And we chase after happiness, and we chase after this sort of illusory positive emotions, and we reject these other parts of ourselves. And in that rejection of self, we also move into judgment, and we move into judgment of others. What our research has shown is that the path to emotional intelligence is a path that starts on the inside. And I've come to believe all change starts on the inside. We look at the Sustainable Development Goals that I have behind me here, and we think about what the world needs to accomplish to create a sustainable future. And every single one of these could be done this year. We have the technology, we have the wealth, we have the resources to protect life, to have no poverty, to have no hunger. We could do this. And why don't we? And the answer is because we're not committed to it. And why aren't we committed to it? It's because we do not see this as what's most important for us. We don't see peace as more important than a fancy car. We don't see peace as more important than our own comfort. And in some ways, that's deeply disappointing. Yeah. And I think that sometimes I question and I say, well, maybe human nature is not ready for a world of peace. But at the same time, I see huge progress in the last 25 years of doing this work. And I see a level of awareness and commitment, and people like EQ for Peace working all over the world saying, we're going to make a difference, and we're going to start with ourselves. And this is how I would define emotional intelligence in one non-slide. And the notion of our heads and hearts working together in harmony. It's not about the old model of head over heart, nor is it about heart over head.
Right, right.
Emotional intelligence is about our emotions and cognition working together. And as we can bring those parts of ourselves together, we start to have integration or integrity. And as we have that integration, we start to feel a sense of reconciliation. We set a sense of harmony, a sense of ourselves being in sync with ourselves. That, what our research shows, is that starting of inner acceptance is in fact the path to creating more authentic connections with others. And that when we can compassionately love ourselves, see ourselves as growing beings, perfect in our imperfection. And when we can have that sense of that we're here to grow and learn, and all of us is part of it. Our failures, our successes, our flaws, our strengths, it's all part of our learning growth. When we can come to that place, we're able to accept that more in others. And when we accept that more in others, we start to build more authentic relationships and connections. And we start to see that our choices have an impact in the world. So, as we start to consider this pathway to peace of growing emotional intelligence, what I would suggest is it starts with making friends with all of our feelings, even the challenging, complex, messy ones. And I don't know about you, but I have some friends who are not the easiest people to get along with, and I have some friends who are like, oh yeah, whatever, that's fine. But I have some friends who are very opinionated. I have some friends who have very strong likes and dislikes. I have some friends who really want to do X and not Y. And so they're not always the easiest friends, but they can still be good friends. And I would suggest the same thing is true with our emotions. Grief, despair, loneliness, fear, anger, they are difficult friends. And there are many, many times in my life when I've said, I shouldn't feel that. But when I do that, I put that feeling away from me and I treat it like it's something other. And when I treat it like it's something other, just as we do with humans, when we other people, we make it easy to hold ourselves above or apart or below them. When we do that with our own emotions, we are saying we're rejecting that within ourselves. And whether you approach this from a spiritual perspective or a humanistic perspective, that notion that maybe what if all of us is here for a reason? What if all of us, all of our emotions, all of our insights, all of our lived experiences are here for a reason and they're here to help us grow? We can then start to listen to those feelings and to start to consider, what if this feeling isn't happening to me, but it's happening for me? What if this message of this emotion is from me, for me? And emotions don't communicate, like they don't come out with their sign and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. Let me tell you about it. Let's have a conversation. Emotions give us a little nudge. And that little nudge sometimes is quite difficult to interpret. And when we have complex situations, like seeing children being killed in a foreign war, seeing families torn apart because of some power-hungry, tyrannical, political action. And we start to have these complex, difficult feelings. It's so hard to tease those apart and to say, these are messages from me, for me, about what matters. And something that's helped me do this, Marilyn Jorgensen is one of our leaders of our coaching school. And she is a master certified coach, and she and I developed the EQ Coach Certification Program. And I have for many years felt uncomfortable with and often afraid of emotions. And it's been my pattern to be in that brain over heart mode. And it used to be that when I would be in a meeting, for example, and I could see someone's crossing their arms and, upset or showing some feeling, I would avoid it because I thought, well, I don't want to open Pandora's box. And it's been a big surprise to me to find that that when I do acknowledge what somebody is feeling, it actually seems to help the situation instead of make it more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But one time, Marilyn and I were in a course together we were facilitating, and I could see somebody was really upset about something. And Marilyn walked up and put her hand on this person's shoulder and said, "It looks like you are experiencing some very big feelings right now." And I was stunned by this for a whole number of reasons. One was that she opened Pandora's box. She went right over there and asked about it. And but another was this phrase, "You're experiencing big feelings." And this was a revelation to me, and it continues to be a revelation to me, that we can label our feelings in a way that's neutral, and to just make space for them and to say, that's interesting. There's something going on here. If we look at the neurobiology of emotion, what we can see is that emotions are encoded messages that last in our brains and bodies for up to about, guess how long? 6 seconds? They last in our brains and bodies for about 6 seconds. And these chemicals affect literally every living cell in the human body. They're part of our regulatory system. They carry information and energy. And these chemicals travel around our cells, changing the regulatory system of our body, changing everything, our digestion, our reproduction, our endocrine system, our immune system, and our brains, our hearts, our breathing, our skin temperature, our muscles. Everything is being affected by these emotions all the time. It's happening continuously, automatically, and very, very quickly. So every about quarter of a second, emotions are being produced, and they're going into the bloodstream, and they're affecting different cells. It takes about half a second, about a quarter second to produce the chemicals, about another quarter second for those chemicals to be released through the pituitary gland into our bloodstream and start affecting the cells in our bodies. And those chemicals stay in our bloodstream for about 6 seconds. 4 to 7 seconds. Candace Pert, who was one of our advisory board members until she passed away, discovered the opiate receptor in the prefrontal cortex, which was revolutionary to realize that there were emotion receptors in what was considered the seat of reason. And she's the one who shared this with me originally back in 1997, that emotions are almost like a second nervous system. We have these nerve cells that carry information. We have these chemical messengers that carry information. Now, what's interesting is to understand, why do we have these emotions? And why do we produce a lot of them at some times? And if we take this neutral view of emotion and not see them as positive or negative, just simply functional, they're part of how our bodies adapt to the environment that we're in, we realize that emotions are there to help us survive and thrive. And what happens is we perceive something, and when we perceive something, we start to produce emotions in response to that. And sometimes we're conscious of that, sometimes we're not. But these emotional messages are helping us react to what's in our environment. And from a survival perspective, what's in our environment are opportunities and threats. So in simple terms, emotions are an automatic biological response to perceived opportunities and threats. Perceived is a big deal here. When we have big feelings, it's because we're perceiving a big opportunity or a big threat. And when we have mild feelings, it's because we're perceiving a mild opportunity or a mild threat. Some emotion researchers say that emotions are emergent theory of emotions. So first, I just talked about the adaptive theory of emotions. The emergent theory of emotions is that we're always producing many emotions, and different researchers have different ideas about how many there are, but we're producing all these emotion chemicals. And as we need them, we start to produce more of them. And so at any given moment, we have lots and lots of different emotion chemicals. And based on how our perceptions and our interactions are changing, we start to bring up more of them to deal with what's in front of us. And when we start to say things like, I shouldn't feel that, and rejecting part of ourselves and moving into this kind of cycle of self-rejection, we start to produce certain feelings. We start to produce feelings like shame and saying there's something wrong with me. Not only did I do something wrong, but I am wrong. I am bad. And we start to internalize that. And on the other hand, when we start to accept what we're feeling is legitimate, even if it's confusing, we then start to produce feelings of curiosity and feelings that help us grow and learn. And if we're here in some way to grow and learn, then that seems like a worthwhile endeavor. So emotions are here for a reason. They have a biological purpose. They affect us, whether we're conscious of them or not. And they're occurring in response for perceived opportunities and threats. So as we start to look more at the neurobiology of feeling, and we think about it in this context of peace, and this notion that peace starts within and in our relationships, we then realize that emotions are a kind of language that can help us decode what's going on within ourselves and with others. I'd like to close by sharing just a little bit more data, which is, as you can see, I'm really a fan of this, the brain side of this equation, but I'm learning to make friends with all of my feelings.
Nice.
In the history of loneliness, before the pandemic, people were at the loneliest level ever recorded.
Before.
And we know that loneliness is a bellwether indicator of many brain illnesses, of many forms of emotional ill health. During the pandemic, loneliness has increased dramatically. And some studies go anywhere from 25 to 50% increase. At the same time, our research at 6 Seconds in the State of the Heart report, which is the world's largest study of emotional intelligence, we've seen that emotional intelligence has declined in the world, particularly during the pandemic, and particularly emotional intelligence skills like navigating emotions, which is our ability to proactively use emotions, and empathy, which is our ability to connect with emotions beyond ourselves. These two emotional intelligence competencies, coupled with the isolation and disconnection that people are feeling, the loneliness that people are feeling, puts us in a very vulnerable place in the world, a very vulnerable place toward rapid escalation, toward increased polarization, increasing that sense of othering, severing the connectedness that we feel. And if the path to peace is that connectedness with self, with others, with the larger world, we're in a moment of extreme peril, not just in Ukraine and Afghanistan and Syria and many places in the world, but really everywhere. This research from the State of the Heart is a randomized sampling from 139 countries, 129 countries. All over the world, we're seeing these declines in these skills that are correlated with increased volatility and increased isolation. And so I would suggest that right now is a time of tremendous need for this work. And we can see it in the headlines. We can see it in our everyday lives. We can see it in the people that we're talking to who are on the edge of burnout or past it, on the edge of despair or past it, feeling lost, trying to find some new path. And the good news is these are learnable skills, and we can help people do this. And it's time for us to do that. So thank you very much for having me today. And we have a couple minutes of questions, but
Wow. Wow. Super well put. I've never heard it put that way before, thinking of the connection part of it being that critical to the whole thing. And I didn't know either that. So you were saying that the loneliness was at the highest level before the pandemic, right?
yeah.
Ouch. And got a lot worse.
Yeah, there's some great work that Cigna, the insurance company, is doing around loneliness, both identifying the loneliness as a risk factor, but also measuring loneliness and before and during the
Really?
pandemic.
Wow. Wow. Um, that's interesting. All right. To hear an insurance company, I mean, they're going for statistics and, um, trying to perceive the future. So that's huge.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So what do we do? Josh? What do we do? I know you're trying your best. We're trying our best. What do we do to get people connected or help them feel all this stuff?
Well, I mean, the way we go about it at 6 Seconds is we train people to train people.
Okay.
And we have certification programs for educators, for consultants, for coaches, and for facilitators. We have measurement tools that can be embedded in schools and organizations because you get what you measure.
Mm.
And when you start to make this stuff quantifiable and you start to put it into the dashboard, you can talk about emotions at work. You can talk about emotions in school, and you can measure the competence and the effect of it. And so we have a set of tools that measure the impact in organizations and schools. We have a set of measures that measure the skills and the impact in individuals, and we can connect those dots. And we have lots and lots of case studies that show that when you start to develop these skills as an individual, it transforms teams, it transforms schools, and improves the outcomes. So it's not an either or. It's not like, oh, well, we don't have time for emotional intelligence because we're trying to sell widgets, or we don't have time for emotional intelligence because we're trying to get kids to pass tests. In fact, emotional intelligence helps with both of those. And in all sectors all over the world, over and over and over again, we've seen this data showing that these skills make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And again, they're learnable and measurable skills. So that's what we need to do.
Okay. Whew. All right. Wow. Well put. Thank you for coming and enlightening me and others. And I'll send you a link to the recording later. But I very, very much appreciate it, and we'll be using this recording for a long time. So,
Thank you, Matt.
thank you very much. Take care, Josh. Bye bye. Wow.